You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
There's multiple types here in the Old Testament of things that we see in the New Testament. The Jews were slaves in Egypt, just as we are slaves to sin. Yahweh rescued them from being slaves. Jesus rescues us from being slaves. He redeemed them and then supernaturally protected them in the wilderness, making sure they had everything they needed. He redeems us and does the same. He did this so they could be in the position of taking the land. He does this so that we can be in the position of telling others about what he has done.
The Old Testament isn't just a collection of ancient stories. It's a tapestry woven with threads that all point to Jesus. From the Passover lamb in Exodus, to the bronze serpent in the wilderness, from Jonah's 3 days in the fish, to David's victory over Goliath. These moments foreshadow the Savior who was to come. They're not random events. They're divine signposts, guiding us toward the Messiah. Today, Pastor Ken explains to you how these stories reveal Jesus as the centerpiece all along. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Amos, chapter 2, as he continues his message, A Blast from the Past.
The correlation of the hybrid Apkallu with the Nephilim and their descendants is reinforced by a book called Gilgamesh. And there's been some additional things that have been found recently that point to Gilgamesh, connecting him to the Apkallu in a cylinder that they recently found. He's called the master of the Apkallu. He's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, if you've ever read the book, Gilgamesh. That's what it says in it. But he was also a giant, and he was twice as tall as Goliath. Big guy. Most older commentaries, by the way, when you start studying this, will not reference the Apkallu. Again, it's a new term, recently translated with folks who are looking at obscure Mesopotamian texts. In the book of Enoch, however, the action of the watchers, who are fallen angels, is clearly rebellious. So in the dictionary for deities and demons in the Bible, it says this: they swear an oath and bind each other with curses not to alter the plan. They conspire to take human wives, and 200 of them come down to Mount Hermon. They have intercourse with women and beget giants and cause all kinds of trouble here on earth. They also impart illicit revelation about astrology, roots, spells, and the making of weapons. And if you read Enoch, there's also a comment about them inventing makeup. Just saying that. Don't know whether that's evil or not, but it shows up in the text. The writer of the book of Enoch had among his objects two main things. And this is a guy writing back in 1887 about this. He wished to represent the heathen deities, the Apkallu. He didn't know what they were called then. The evil spirits that men worshipped at that time, and their progenitors, the fallen angels, as being the originators of moral evil. That's the whole purpose behind that book. They wanted to show that God's purpose for touching these beings and the practices they had introduced should be told by someone, but not a Jewish prophet, but someone who lived prior to the existence of the Jews. So Enoch made a good choice for the one that they would write this book. Even though it's a pseudepigraphal book, we know it's not Enoch, but somebody wrote it. In Enoch 6:1-8, here's what it actually says. It happened that when the sons of humans multiplied in those days, that sounds like Genesis 6, they fathered good and beautiful daughters. And the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them and said to one another, "Come, let us choose for ourselves women from among the humans and bring forth children for ourselves." And Semiza, who was their ruler, said to them, "I fear you may not wish to do this deed, and I alone will be responsible for a great sin." Therefore they all answered him, "Let us swear by an oath and devote one to another to mutual destruction, not to turn back from the decision until we complete it and do this deed." So we're getting some insight into the rebellion of the angels with that comment. They all made this vow together and put each other under a curse in regard to this. And these are the names of their rulers, and there's a list of names there. These are the chiefs of tens among them. So when you take a look at that and do the math, it means there were 200 fallen angels who then went and found themselves probably more than one woman, and produced giants. Nephilim are called that in the book of Genesis. But for Babylon, Assyria, Acadia, and all the other surrounding cultures, they're called Apkallu. And they're good guys, not bad guys. But they don't even have them as good guys all the time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So what are the Apkallu? Okay. Again, from the dictionary of demons and deities in the Bible, or deities, okay. It says this: in Mesopotamian religion, the term Apkallu, which is from the Sumerian word Abgal, okay, is used for the legendary creatures endowed with extraordinary wisdom. They were 7 in number. They're culture heroes from before the flood. They're fallen angels, okay? They're not culture heroes. In the myth, the 21 poultices, and you see the 7 Apkallu of Eridu. They also have the 7 Apkallu of Apsu. They're in the service of their god, Ea, or Enki. And there's a whole variety of different things that they do. The bottom line is they attribute different things that they say are good, like wisdom and social forms and craftsmanship and omens and magic and medicine. They say that the Apkallu did all that. Now, the sons of God in Genesis and the watchers in Enoch are divine beings. They're fallen divine beings. They're fallen angels. Their job description is watcher. Angel, by the way, is a job description as well. They're also, if you're in the other cultures, they're the Apkallu of the pre-flood cultures in Mesopotamia. And then they also point out that there were 4 of them after the flood, and that they could also mate with humans. So could the watchers. So again, we look at Amos chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them. Though his height was like the height of cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks, I also destroyed his fruit above and his roots below. It was I who brought you from the land of Egypt and led you into the wilderness for 40 years so that you could take possession of the land of the Amorite. Now, Dr. Heiser says that some of the Amorites were unusually tall, would be proof enough to the Israelites. Now, Amos said they're all tall, okay? But they're all descended from the Nephilim, all of them. That means that what we see in Numbers 13, 32, and 33 was the case. For an Israelite, it means that the native population of Canaan had a supernatural, sinister point of origin. The Israelites just didn't come in and take them. God had to do something. This was not a battle for land. It was a battle between Yahweh and other Elohim, or gods, little g, who were there. Gods who had managed to raise up a competing human bloodline completely opposed to Yahweh's plan and Yahweh's people. And Israel is now finding themselves aligning with that. Amos, by referring to this, after citing the wrongdoing of Yahweh's people, Israel, is showing that not only is this rebellious and a rebellion against Yahweh, but by rebelling the way they have, they've aligned themselves with the other side. They are traitors. Israel's penetration into Canaan was a manifestation of Yahweh's power. And he's the one that overthrew these guys, not them. I don't know about you. I mean, I've wrestled guys who are twice as big as me. It wasn't fun, but if you know more than they do and you can move quicker than them, you can do things. But I don't know if I want to confront somebody who's 15 feet tall. The various ideas that exist in Israel about this at that time, it's not new. It dates back even further. There's a historian writing, his name's Cosmos, let me see if I can pronounce this last name, Indicopluestus. He's writing in the 6th century AD, and he writes this: the writers of Chaldean history, as being more ancient and living farther east, so he's talking about the Mesopotamians there. He had knowledge of some of this. Have mentioned in their works both the flood and the building of the tower, since they saw that tower with their own eyes under the process of construction, being no doubt well aware that the men of that time, in fear of another flood, erected it as a place of refuge and safety. But the men of later times, when they read Moses also and found that Noah, in whose time the deluge occurred, was the 10th from Adam, Well, they also came up with 10 kings, too, who had reigned 2,242 different years. And there's this whole list of names that, here's the name that they used versus Adam. So Olorus rather than Adam, Alapres rather than Seth, and just on and on and on. And you go down to Noah, and in his time the flood recorded by Noah occurred. Now, Mesopotamian culture had created all kinds of different alternative narratives of creation and the flood. They had different names. They had different views of what took place. Of course, Moses is setting the record straight. It's Noah. He's a man. But the alternative story was part of the idol-worshiping background that Israel and Judah had to deal with, and Israel had turned to. Our culture today continues to play this ancient game, by the way. We now say everything was created by nothing, and it's all evolution. And as you can tell, this has been a constant battle dating back prior to Abraham. Moses tells us the man who built the ark is Noah. We know that. But in the surrounding cultures, he's also called Zeusudra, Atrahasis, or I love this one, Utananishpishti. Try and say that one real fast. They also considered him to be an Apkallu and a giant. Now, here's what we read in Genesis 6:9 about this thing about him being a giant. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous person who was perfect. Among his generation, Noah was pleasing to God. In Genesis 6:9, Noah is tamim. That's the Hebrew word. That means whole, entire, intact, unobjectionable, free from blemish, blameless. In other words, Noah's 100% human. He has no other genetic problem. He's untainted by the Nephilim. By the way, that's another theory, too, that it was hiding in the gene pool when Noah got on the... Let's just not go there. The Babylonian wise men, trace the origins to primordial times prior to the flood, when there were heroes who received from the gods the knowledge necessary to form human culture, and they call them Apkallu. They had divine knowledge of all things, and one of the most renowned human Apkallus was Utanapishtatim, who, that's Noah, according to what they're saying. He escaped the destruction of the flood due to a warning from the wise and benevolent deity Ea, also known as Enki. This is not in Genesis, okay? Not hardly. This is why Genesis was written. But after the flood had completed its destruction and the earth was recreated, Utanapishtim was given the status of a god. That's not in the book of Genesis. He's a man. You can see why God had Moses write Genesis. Now here's the thing. Noah, if you look at Luke 3:36 and 3:38, he's in the line of Christ, right? If he's in the line of Christ, that means he is human, not Nephilim. Because there is no way God was going to allow the seed of a competing bloodline created by a bunch of fallen angels to get in there. And he didn't. That's why he destroyed the planet. Because there was a gene pool problem that was getting worse and worse and worse. And that's why when you read the book of Joshua and you start wondering, why is he destroying all of these different villages? He didn't destroy all of them, just some. Well, that was what was living there. And we'll see a little bit of that. To Babylon and others, though, the Apkallu, the Nephilim, they were the good guys. Babylon's name, the Apkallu, we see them called the Nephilim, the Rephaim, the sons of Anak, the Anakim, the Amorites. They're all the same. And Amos is drawing the attention of Israel back to reality. You're not here because of any great thing you did. God did this. These aren't good guys like you're hearing from the guys next door. These are evil. They're demonic. And they're the primary cause of the flood. This is why the flood took place, is because this was happening. And if you take some of the other things it says in Enoch, by the way, the demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. So these aren't good guys, nation of Israel. They're not somebody that you should be worshiping. Not hardly. But the people of the northern kingdom have been sucked into a lie, simply because there is nobody there teaching them the truth, okay? Occasionally some prophet will show up and tell them the truth, and then they chase them away, or they try to kill them, or do different things, but they eventually quit showing up. Now, the Jewish authors, according to a gentleman who studied this topic, discredited the Mesopotamian Apkallu. That's what they did. They're the watchers, they're the Nephilim. But the Mesopotamian folks thought that they were okay, even though they were wicked teachers. And the demonization that shows up in the Bible is actually partially built upon some of the mythology from the Mesopotamian cultures. They were occasionally seen by them as being evil. And some, they thought they also inhabited the underworld. So these aren't nice people even to the surrounding cultures, yet they were worshiping them. Again, in Numbers 13, 32 and 33, we've referenced that a couple of times. Here's what it says. They presented, these are the spies, they've come back, they're giving the report. They presented the Israelites with a discouraging report of the land that they investigated, saying, the land that we passed through to investigate is the land that devours its inhabitants. All the people we saw there are of great stature. I remember studying this and thinking, that's hyperbole, there's no way. We saw the Nephilim there, and descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. And we seemed like grasshoppers, both to ourselves and to them. But based on what Amos is telling us, it's not hyperbole, because Amos is saying all the Amorites were giants, all of them. Yeah, maybe not all, because there is an Amorite who is also in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Her name is Rahab. Just saying. The problem, though, here is the people of Israel had forgotten who had defeated them just to even be able to live in the promised land. They had defeated the enemy of Yahweh. They had been involved in that battle. In the view of the biblical writers, Dr. Heiser tells us the Israel is at war with the enemies spawned by fallen angels. That's who they're fighting. In other words, when they go into the promised land, it is an extension of the war that began in Genesis chapter 3. And except now it's a physical war, and they're fighting against those beings that these fallen angels tried to throw up there, saying, oh, we'll take care of your problem. Genesis 10 clearly casts the human inhabitants of these nations as owing their existence to Yahweh, and they descended from Noah's sons, and therefore Noah, all the way back to Adam, Yahweh's first human son. The Nephilim bloodline has a totally different pedigree. It is fallen angels. They're produced by fallen angels. They don't belong to Yahweh. Coexistence is not possible. So now you understand why God says, when you go to Jericho, kill everybody. When you go to this town, kill everybody. Because they have this in those towns. Amos is saying to us that the battle to take the promised land, the land filled with giants, was not a battle for land. It's a physical manifestation of the war declared in Genesis 3. That's it. That's what he's saying. Moses attacked and defeated the Amorite god kings, if you want to call them that, the kings, Sihon and Og. Og was a giant. Then Joshua moved south and attacked Jericho. Why not attack from the north? Well, he attacked the stronghold of these giants. Jericho was one of these strongholds. There were certain villages that were dedicated to destruction in the book of Joshua. You'll see that. And it goes back to the fact that in those villages, not all the descendants who lived there were completely human. There were Nephilim living in these communities. In Jericho, they found evidence. They have found caches of skulls, and they look a little different. What they do is they take the skull and they cover it with plaster. They believe they belong to some beloved ancestor. Maybe they could also have been Nephilim, but there's another skull they found that dates prior to the flood. And they actually had someone reconstruct it, and it is human but not entirely human when you reconstruct it using scientific methods. We may be looking at someone who is a Nephilim. And there were a lot of these in Jericho. Why Jericho? Why not? If that's where they live, let's start there. With the move of the northern kingdom now embracing the worship of Baal and creating a state religion mixing Yahweh and fertility gods, not only were they confused about who Yahweh is, but they're seriously confused about the supernatural players who were involved in this. Amos, after citing their crimes, ties their behavior to having forgotten just who it was that defeated the giants they found on the land when they first invaded. He says, hey, you forgot about this, that I did this for you. That supernatural war, by the way, is still going on. It hadn't ended. Still hasn't ended. It's still going on today. But they had sided with the narrative of the surrounding nations that these were good guys, not bad guys. In other words, they have become traitors. They're not worthy of worship. What was considered heroic by surrounding cultures was, per Moses, corruption, to be devoted to destruction. Who was it that destroyed these hybrid beings descended from fallen divine beings and human women? Yahweh says it was him. And for these hybrids, it was to be total destruction. That's what he means by the above and below. There's going to be no more kids from this group of people. There's a gene pool problem in Canaan, and God is dealing with it. And he's using Joshua and the people of Israel, both the north and the southern kingdoms, to deal with it. Amos chapter 2, verse 9, again, it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, though his height was like the height of cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. I also destroyed his fruit above and the root below. In other words, when we destroyed them, they weren't having more kids. They were done. The Amorites are characterized as being particularly tall and strong, which tells you that Yahweh's saving act of what he did when compared to the depravity is why Amos is having to bring this up. And the reminder is sobering. God judged the former inhabitants of the land. What do you think he's going to do to you? You are exceeding the sin of those people. What do you think he's going to do to you? The Lord reminds Israel that the Amorites were destroyed for the very things that they're now doing. And he says, you think I'm going to let you do this indefinitely when I didn't let them do it indefinitely? They had 400 years. Israel knows better. They get 200. And then they're gone. Verse 10, it was I who brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you in the wilderness for 40 years, so that you might take possession of the land of the Amorite. Now, Yahweh backs up 40 years from when they first went into the promised land to explain how the people were even in the position to go in the first place. Step one, before you can take down the giants, we got to rescue you from Egypt. And he did that. The picture Amos draws for us is also one that we need to be aware of, as there's multiple types here in the Old Testament of things that we see in the New Testament. The Jews were slaves in Egypt, just as we are slaves to sin. Yahweh rescued them from being slaves. Jesus rescues us from being slaves. He redeemed them and then supernaturally protected them in the wilderness, making sure they had everything they needed. He redeems us and does the same. He did this so they could be in the position of taking the land. He does this so that we can be in the position of telling others about what he has done.
You're listening to the UnSafe Bible, a ministry of Pastor Ken Brown at Calvary Chapel, Martin County, in Hobe Sound, Florida. As Pastor Ken continues in this series through the book of Amos, we see that Amos issues a warning against Israel and its rulers. If God's demands for spiritual purity aren't met, they'll be met with judgment that will destroy the system that these rulers have spent decades and centuries building up. Amos reminds the people of Israel that their society is at best a house of cards, and it's only standing because of God's blessing. But when injustices continue to pile up without any care for those who've been entrusted to steward God's chosen people, he will eventually take action. Even though we don't live in that society today, we can see how the corruption of mankind can lead to societal decline. While we may witness one system collapse after another, it's a reminder to us believers that this world isn't our home. There is a new heaven and a new earth coming soon, one that will rid of all of the injustices and forces of evil that dominate the world today. If you'd like to hear more teaching from Pastor Ken, we invite you to visit our website at theunsafebible.com and visit the Media tab to access all of our past broadcasts. While you're there, you can find details about our services at Calvary Chapel, Martin County, so that you can join us in person for worship. The world is hard enough on its own, so we cherish the time we spend together in God's Word. Join us for the next edition right here on the UnSafe Bible.